Hello, and welcome to my shop. I'm Bert Delisle, and today I'm going to show you how I make my version of a 2022 Christmas ornament. I'm starting a little early this year because my project is fairly involved in making these little acorns. And these little acorns are hollowed out, they're threaded. I have put internal threads in the body, and I have external threads on the acorn nut. It's knurled on the outside, and that's going to be my 2022 Christmas ornament. So if you take a look at the blanks I start with are a piece of oak and a piece of walnut. They're roughly inch and a half by inch and a half by whatever. They're just blanks of wood. And if you take a look at the weight on these in, okay, so let's zero this out. Let's start over here. Okay, so that's at 0. So if I put these blanks on here, and you'll notice that they are 3.2 ounces, or in grams, that's 92 grams. And if we take the hollowed out acorn and set it on here, we'll notice that it's 27 grams, or 0.9 of an ounce. This particular one is 0.6 of an ounce, or 20 grams. So by hollowing the acorns, it reduces the weight substantially. So what I'm going to do is make my acorns. So like I said, I start with a blank, and I'll put it between centers, and I'll turn a bunch of acorn bodies, and I'll turn them into rounds like this, and I'll put a groove or a tenon on one end, and I'll do all of the blanks that way. I'll rough turn them all to this shape. For the tops, I do the same thing. I'll take the walnut pieces and I just turn them around and put a tenon on one end, and I'll do whatever number of blanks I've got to do. So my next step then would be to mount it in a chuck. I drill it, and I thread I drill it, hollow it, and get all of the blanks drilled, hollowed, and set aside and for threading. And when I have all of the blanks in the set drilled and hollowed, then I'll put the threading jig on. The threading jig, I use this threading jig. It's a Chefware Kits threading jig. I'll set it up on my lathe, and I'll set this up so that it is perpendicular to the ways, and so the lead screw will work parallel to the ways so that it'll thread straight. And with this particular setup, I'm going to set the threading jig up so that I can mount the piece in the chuck, do the threading, screw this back far enough that I can take this off without moving the jig, put the next piece on, and thread the jig. Because they're all going to be drilled and hollowed to exactly the same size, I won't have to move the threading jig. I can just thread every one of the blanks at the same time, and they'll all be exactly the same thread pitch. And I'll do the same with the acorn tops. I'll do the external thread very similar, mount it on the chuck, cut the outside thread, and they'll all be exactly the same thread to fit into any one of the acorn bodies, so they'll all be the same. That's my target. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to get set up here, and we'll rough out a set of blanks. For this demonstration, I'm only going to do 6 blanks. I've got about 30 sitting on the bench here for me to do later, but for today, I'm just going to be doing a demonstration of the 6 that I have cut and ready. Start with the step center. Let's see which angle is probably the best. Probably camera 2 is probably the best angle for this one. And I used to mark all these to find center, but after a while, after doing so many of them, I just started guessing at the center because it doesn't really matter. It's going to be turned around anyhow, so it doesn't matter if it's a little off center when you put the block on. Okay, so I'm going to start roughing out some of the Acorn bodies, and I'll use my spindle roughing gouge, and we'll just bang off through half a dozen of these real quick, and we'll go from there. Okay, there's half a dozen acorn bodies, and we'll go ahead and rough out half a dozen acorn tops. Okay, there we have it. We got six blanks roughed out. The next stage is to drill them and hollow them, and then thread them. So we'll end up with blanks like this. Okay, that's 6 blanks done, and basically these blanks now. Oh, I should have hollowed them, and I neglected to do that. After I drilled them, I was going to hollow them, so I have to remount each one and hollow them. That might wash it out a little bit too much, but I need to be able to see too, so to hollow these. To hollow these, I use a hunter tool with a little carbide, and it makes short work of hollowing these out. And I only have to hollow out just enough to leave enough room for the threads. Okay, so that's one hollowed out, just enough of a land for the threading jig to put threads on. Okay, so now we've got 6 of them that are hollowed. They're rough turned, hollowed, and they have a land for the threads. So the next step on here would be to set up the threading jig to do the inside threads. Okay, so I'm going to rearrange the chuck. Put the chuck on the threading jig. We'll align it to the lathe so that it'll run true. And we'll put the cutter so we have the 3/4 inch double bevel, 60-degree double bevel cutter. We'll put it in the Morris taper too, and I'll use my handy dandy retaining bar. It's a 3/8 thread. It fits in the headstock and screws into the collet, so it actually pulls the collet into the Morris taper too, nice and tight. Now we'll set the we'll set the the tool rest up and set the chuck so that it's square to the bed. So now that I've set the the banjo so that the banjo is perpendicular to the lathe bedways. Now I need to make sure that the chuck is parallel with the bedways. And how we do that is I'll take a tri-square and I'll lay it on the back side of the chuck like this, and I'll sight down this side of the bedways. Let's see what camera we can get you on here. Okay, so I'm sighting down this way on the square and lining it up with the lathe ways. And because this is a fairly long square ruler, you can get fairly accurate. So now this is perpendicular. This back of the chuck is perpendicular to the bedways. The banjo is square to the bedways. So as long as I don't move the tool post, this will always be running parallel back and forth to do the thread cutting. So now we'll put a workpiece in, and we'll get the depth set right. So right now, as we can see on here, we're quite a ways away from the cutter head. But what I can do is, by keeping the square, I can loosen the tool post off, and I can run this way, and then get it square. I'm just a little bit too far in. Now I keep this nice and square, and I lock the banjo down. And because I've already squared this and made it parallel with the ways, this will run in and out no problem. So that's running all the way through, nice and straight, just barely touching the wood. And I have enough adjustment on here to cut my threads. So what I'll do now is I'll make the first cut. Let's see which is the best angle to show this. Not that one for sure. What I'll try and do is I'll try and move this camera. I'll move this camera, get rid of that. I'll move this camera down and try and get a little better angle on the view of the thread cutting activity. So let's see what we can do here. Okay, so let's see how that works. Looks like that's going to work okay. Okay, so now we're set up. We're ready to do it. I can crank this back far enough that I can take the piece out and put another piece in without having to change anything on here. Doing the first one, I will find out where the cutter contacts the wood, and I'll put a pencil mark on here. So right now this is just touching the wood, so that would be 0. So that's my 0 point. Now when I want to cut threads, I loosen this and bring this cutter this direction, half a turn. and I lock it. Loosen this and take it another half turn. So that's one full turn. So one full turn on here from just contacting the wood. Okay, so that's one full turn on this adjustment. I believe is going to give me the threads that I need. Now I can take this piece off, and I've already made a cutter. Let's see which camera would be the best one on here. So this is my mounting jig for finishing the outside of the Acorn body. So what I normally do now that I've got threads on here is I just try it on here. If it'll spin on here, and it does, it fits on there perfectly, and the threads are nice, perfectly sized. So this particular Acorn is ready for final finishing. But I'll continue on to do the rest of these, and it's a simple matter of mounting another Acorn in the chuck. And because this is already set at the right dimension for the proper depth of thread, I'm just going to go ahead and cut the whole thread at once. So we'll just take this one here and try it on the test. and it looks like it's a perfect fit. Screws all the way on. It'll butt up against there, so I'll be able to use this to shape the outside of this acorn. And so basically I'll continue on with the rest of these and get them all cut. So the beauty of using the jig like this, where I can just keep changing the parts, I don't have to change the settings on here, so that I know that every acorn that I push through here is going to be exactly the same size. One of the things when I'm holding and working this is I keep my one hand on the chuck just to keep some vibration down, and it seems to help. And I go ahead and I make sure that I test each one of these just in case it's a little bit tighter, whatever. This works perfectly, but for the time it takes to make sure that this will fit on the turning jig, then makes it a lot easier. And like I say, when I'm normally doing this, I would make up my whole batch of acorn bodies. In this case, I'm only doing a half a dozen, but if I'm set up to do this again, I'll be doing like 30 at a time. So there you go. That's 6 acorn bodies ready to be finished turned. So the next step is to finish turn the acorn bodies. So I'll break down the threading jig. I like to use a little pointed little wooden soft nose on the tailstock, because I can run this in there just enough to hold a little bit of support, and then when I cut down onto the end of the acorn, I've got soft wood there, so I don't have to worry about hitting my tool against the steel of the Okay, there we have it. One little acorn body. Turned, finished, threaded, ready to accept an acorn nut. When I make all of the acorn nuts, I'll be able to take any one of the acorn tops and it should thread on just like that. Just like that, perfectly. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn the rest of these and then we'll switch over and start doing the acorn tops. So there we have it. We got a half a dozen acorn bodies turned, threaded, finished, ready for tops. Okay, I'll come back when I get set up to do the tops. We'll come back and do part 2. Okay, we're back ready to do the acorn tops. So what I've got right now is I've got half a dozen of these acorn tops already rough turned with a little tenon on them, and we're going to put the tenon in the chuck. And what we'll do is we'll finish turning this around and maybe just shape just a little bit, but the most important part is to put a tenon on here that'll be large enough to accept the threads, basically to duplicate this thread that's on here, only on the end of the walnut. And we'll drill a 3/4 inch hole in the head here just to get rid of some weight and to allow us to use this jam chuck in order to mount the acorn top onto this jam chuck and finish rounding it and texturing it. So without further ado, we'll just spin this up and we'll go from there. We'll put a tenon on. So we made the tenon. So the tenon is the major diameter of the threads will fit inside of here. So what I like to do, just to be sure that I've got enough material for the threads, is I'll take about a 1/16 of an inch here and take it down until it'll just enter the acorn body, and that'll let me index the thread cutting jig properly. Just a bit more. That's about right. So that little tiny bit of a tenon on there will just enter, that little tiny bit of a tenon on here will just enter the inside of the threads. And so when the thread goes on here, that'll give us lots of engagement wood to wood. So that one's ready to be threaded. And what we'll go ahead and do now is we'll just get all 6 blanks ready to this stage. Okay, so that's 6 acorn tops ready for threading. So we'll get the threading jig spun around here and we'll start threading the acorn tops. So because I didn't loosen the threading jig from the tool post into the banjo, all I have to do is set the cutter into the headstock and then square the banjo, and we'll be ready to start threading. Now the one difference between threading the inside threads and the outside threads is I switch from a 3/4 inch diameter cutter. So there's a 3/4 inch diameter cutter, and here's a 3/8 inch diameter cutter. Now if you look at the thickness of the cutter, this cutter is fairly wide. And this one is really, really narrow. So this is going to allow me to get closer to, the top with a thread. Where with this 3/4 inch cutter, you can see there's almost a 3/16 of an inch away from the end of the acorn, where with the 3/8 cutter, it allows us to get quite a bit in closer. So that works out really well for me. So the cutter is just a 3/8 shaft with a 3/8 cutter. This 3/4 inch cutter has a 3/8 shaft as well. So we'll put this cutter in the headstock, and again, whenever we're using a cutter in the headstock, we use the tie bolt through the headstock to pull the Morris taper to collet in tight. So that sets us up pretty good. We should be able to see that spinning there. I don't know which one's better. You can see it spinning there. Probably this camera here. You might have to reset the camera a little on the angle. But so now, because this chuck and the lead screw is already set for square to the lathe bed. All we need to do is put the piece in. And when we move the banjo, we just need to make sure that we use this framing square to keep us square to the workpiece. And again, we want to be close enough so that I can bring this far enough back to be able to take the piece out and put a new piece in without having to move anything here. And again, I can bring this back out of the way until it's just touching. Okay, so that feels like it's just touching. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check this, make sure it's square, make sure it's locked. This is locked. We can run this in, and I run this in until the cutter actually bumps up against the mating flange of the Acorn top, so I can get the thread in just as close as I possibly can to the end of it here. Okay, I'll see if I can get a little better camera angle on this. That might give us a little better angle on the actual cutting activity. Okay, so the moment of truth now is that we've cut these threads, we've cut these threads. The moment of truth is they should fit in, and it looks like it won't quite go, so that means I have to make another cut. Now, because I've taken this piece out of the chuck, what I need to do is I need to leave the workpiece a little bit loose in here, advance the threader until I can register in a thread, like that. When the chuck is, when the workpiece is in the chuck and just nicely snugged up, I want the cutter to register in a thread, and it looks like it will there. So I'm going to snug this up. And because we were very, very close to fitting, but just not quite, I can now take this angle and move it in, say, almost a quarter of a turn. And we'll make another cut. And we'll try this again. Almost. It's just the threads engage and they go about 1.5 threads, but it's just a little bit tight. So we're probably just one cut away from being at the right diameter. So again, I loosely put the workpiece in the chuck. Just loosely so I can rotate it a little bit. And then I'll bring the whole thing forward, register on the thread. Okay, once it's registered on the thread, there, it looks like that's registered on the thread. And I'll take this, and it was really close, so I'm only going to go 1/8 of a turn on here, and we'll make another cut. So there we go. This looks like it's looks like the threads are really good. You'll also notice that it doesn't quite bottom out at the top and the acorn, but that's fine because we know we have a thread in here and we have a little stop here. I'll go in with a thin parting tool. Once I have all of them threaded to this stage, I'll go in with a thin parting tool and just relieve the back side of the thread, and then the acorn will fit right on nice and free. Now that we have the cutter set to the center line of the workpiece, I'm just going to leave the cutter head set where it is, and I'll cut all of these threads in one pass. And so far that seems to have worked really well. So let's just go ahead and cut some more threads. Now we'll try this on another acorn, and we'll see whether or not this, let's get this one on here. We'll try it on this other acorn, and we'll see how it fits. Fits pretty good. And the beauty of doing it this way is that we can change to a different acorn. And look at that, it's going to screw onto another acorn just perfect. So with the settings that we have now, we can cut the rest of these. We can comfortably cut the rest of these threads and know that they're all going to fit. So now the only thing left to do is to mount this on the little jam chuck and do the texturing on the outside, and we'll have a finished product. So I'll break down the threading jig, and I'll come back when we're ready to do the tops. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so we have the mandrel in here. We bring our tailstock up, lock it in place, a little pressure on it. Now we're ready to spin the acorn body and take it to final shape. So one of the things we wanted to point out is that in here there is a little bit where the thread ends. There's a little bit of relief that's required, and so I'm going to come in with a thin parting tool and come in on an angle and kind of hollow this out a little bit, but to give a little bit of relief beyond that last thread. Let's see if we can see that. Okay, so let's just pull this off and we'll try it on the body. Now that there's a bit of a relief behind the last thread, we can screw this on. And now it seats up really nice and tight right up against the acorn top. So now we can get a little bit of a look and see what this acorn is going to look like. There's no real set design for an acorn. They're immediately identifiable as an acorn, but we can take some artistic license and change the shapes of a few of these. This one's got a bit of a flat on here, so this acorn head's going to be a little smaller, which probably is okay because the body is a little bit smaller. So we'll take it down a little bit and we'll take it a little bit smaller in diameter, but it looks like it's going to be nice. Slide that on the little mandrel, put a little tailstock pressure up on it, and we can finish turning it. Anchor the jewel, slide the bevel, pick up the cup. I like to use this Wagner tool to put the embellishment on the acorn nut. Bring the tool rest back a little bit, raise it up a little, and I like to bring this in pretty much on center. Keep it level. If the threads are a little bit sticky, what I like to do is take a little bit of wax, just a little bit of general purpose wax, put them on the threads. That helps lubricate the threads. Oak is an open grain wood, so sometimes the threads get a little open grain, they feel a little bit rough. But when you put a little bit of wax on them, the wax will actually fill the grain up a little bit and lubricate. And there we go. One little acorn nut threaded. It's got an acorn, a walnut top and an oak bottom. And only 5 more to go. But you've already seen how I've made them, so basically I'll just continue on with the rest, and thanks a lot for watching.